Behind the guarded gates of Chester Place stood a mansion that Los Angeles once admired as a masterpiece of wealth and taste. But beneath its marble floors and glowing skylights lay stories the city never saw, whispered negotiations, hidden rooms, and a shadow that followed the Doheny name long after the lanterns in the hallways went dark. This was the house that rose with unimaginable speed, expanded with ambition, and absorbed the consequences of a life lived at the edge of power. Some guests reported locked doors that were never explained. Servants hinted at tensions that sharpened as scandals closed in. And connected to this estate was an event so unsettling that society tried to erase it from memory. Yet, through triumph and trouble, the mansion endured, silent and unblinking, holding secrets that still echo in its empty rooms. Stay with me until the end, because the final chapters of this house reveal truths far stranger than its polished facade ever suggested. The story of this house begins long before its marble floors gleamed under chandelier light, or its doors opened to guests who whispered in awe. It begins with a patch of Los Angeles that, at the turn of the 20th century, was transforming from dusty outskirts into a sanctuary for those who wanted more than just space. They wanted stature. Chester Place was conceived as a closed, intimate enclave, a retreat for the newly fortunate who sought privacy, yet desired their homes to speak for them long before they ever stepped outside. Wealthy families watched the city expand with restless ambition, and they wanted a place that stood apart from the noise and uncertainty. Chester Place became that refuge, gated, manicured, and carefully curated, where only a handful of grand residences would rise behind its guarded perimeter. Each home would not simply shelter its owners, but announce their arrival into the upper ranks of Los Angeles society. It was into this atmosphere of exclusivity that a certain residence began to take shape, first as a stately but modestly sized mansion, then as something that seemed to ask for a destiny greater than the sum of its bricks. Built with 22 rooms and a sense of quiet confidence, the house at 8 Chester Place carried an architectural boldness that set it apart, even in a district filled with grand gestures. Its designer imagined a structure that could adapt to changing times and changing owners, a residence that could grow as its future occupants grew in ambition. And while no one yet knew who would eventually claim the home, it seemed almost to wait for someone whose story would match its potential. Its carved stone entrance, tall windows, and sweeping rooflines hinted at a grandeur that had not yet been realized, as if the house itself were preparing for a moment when it would be chosen by someone who understood what it could become. That moment arrived when Edward Doheny, newly propelled into wealth by his bold early ventures into oil, set his eyes on the estate. In a city suddenly filled with opportunity, he wanted a home that did more than offer comfort. He wanted a place that embodied his sudden rise and the transformation of Los Angeles itself. Chester Place captured his imagination instantly. It was private enough to shield his family from the growing curiosity surrounding his success, yet prestigious enough to affirm his place among the city's elite. The neighborhood's reputation was still forming, but Doheny sensed that this was where the most influential figures of the new century would settle. He recognized what the land represented, not a retreat, but a stage, a backdrop against which his family's legacy could unfold. When he first walked the grounds, he saw not just a house, but possibility. The wide lawn seemed to invite gatherings beneath the warm California sky. The heavy facade promised permanence in a city known for constant reinvention. The stillness of Chester Place, interrupted only by the rustle of leaves or the distant sound of carriages, felt like a promise of sanctuary. And in that stillness, he imagined reshaping the residence into something that would leave an impression not just on his own era, but on the decades that would follow. He didn't hesitate. He acquired the house outright, paying in cash, a gesture that would ripple through Los Angeles society and firmly anchor his family's name among its most powerful. The home, in return, seemed to awaken. Workers bustled through the grounds, preparations began for the changes yet to come, and Chester Place felt the stirrings of a new chapter. And as the last signature dried and the keys exchanged hands, the massive wooden door of the mansion swung open for its new owners, revealing a darkened foyer that seemed to inhale the warm outside air, as though the house itself were taking its first full breath in anticipation of everything about to unfold. The house that greeted the Dohenys did not begin as the sprawling masterpiece it would later become. When it first rose from the dusty Los Angeles soil in 1899, it was the work of an architect with grand intentions but limited by the conventions of the era. Designed with 22 rooms, already impressive by the standards of a young and rapidly expanding city, the structure stood firmly in the architectural styles that blended European influence with the West Coast's appetite for spacious, light-filled interiors. It was a residence built to impress without overwhelming, a careful balance between confidence and restraint. Tall windows invited in the warm California sun, while ornamental stonework framed the entrances, giving the house a dignified presence on its corner of Chester Place. From the moment construction began, it was clear that this was no ordinary home. It was a statement of ambition in a city that had only just begun to dream. Inside, the original layout reflected a traditional approach to luxury. Formal rooms lined the ground floor, their proportions designed for social evenings and quiet afternoons alike. The central hall served as the spine of the home, connecting each space with an elegance that suggested thoughtful planning, even in the house's earliest form. Upstairs, bedrooms and private quarters offered comfort rather than extravagance, with modest detailing hinting at the aspirations of the house rather than the full expression it would one day achieve. The craftsmanship, though refined, felt as though it were waiting for someone bold enough to expand upon it, someone willing to transform ordinary spaces into something closer to architectural storytelling. Stylistically, the house leaned toward a mixture of late Victorian influence and the emerging Beaux-Arts sensibilities that had begun sweeping across America. Its designers envisioned a residence that could hold its own among the elite homes of the nation, yet they built it with a flexibility that suggested they knew the city was on the brink of tremendous change. The structure was sturdy, but open to reinvention, its surfaces elegant, but not yet exuberant. It was, in every way, a canvas, grand enough to inspire, understated enough to be reshaped. This adaptability is exactly what drew the Dohenys. When they first studied the home's proportions, they saw not limitations, but possibilities. The 22 rooms felt like the first chapter of a story waiting to be completed, a foundation strong enough to carry a vision far larger than what had originally been imagined. The hallways seemed to invite expansion, the ceilings seemed to beg for height, and the surrounding grounds offered space for additions that could elevate the residence from a fine home to a landmark. And so, with their arrival, the house stood on the edge of transformation. What had begun as a respectable mansion was about to be rewritten into an architectural manuscript, one shaped by ambition, wealth, and a desire to create something that would stand as a symbol of its era. As the Dohenys stepped fully into their new role as custodians of the estate, they embarked on a redesign that would not simply modify the home, but define its identity for generations. The transformation of the house began almost the moment the Dohenys settled inside its walls. What had once been a stately, well-appointed mansion was now simply the starting point for a dream far larger than its original foundations could contain. The family did not approach the renovation as a series of minor adjustments. They treated it as a complete reinvention, a chance to carve their identity into every corridor, archway, and ceiling. Architects, craftsmen, and builders flooded the property, turning Chester Place into a humming construction zone where ambition drowned out the quiet exclusivity the neighborhood was known for. The house seemed to expand week by week, its silhouette shifting against the skyline as new wings rose from the ground and interiors were dismantled to make way for more elaborate designs. The original 22 rooms quickly became insufficient for what the Dohenys envisioned. Walls were pushed outward, hallways elongated, and entire sections of the home reimagined. Rooms that were once modest in scale doubled in size. Ceilings were lifted to accommodate elaborate plasterwork, and new chambers, some vast, some intimate, appeared where blank walls had stood only days before. The construction moved with a kind of urgency, as if the house itself were eager to grow into the form it had always been meant to take. Skilled artisans carved details into pillars and moldings, while imported materials arrived in a steady stream, ensuring that every renewed space reflected not just luxury, but a deliberate artistic statement. As the structure expanded, it began to feel more like an estate than a traditional residence. The square footage swelled to an astonishing 24,000, allowing for grand halls, specialized rooms, hidden nooks, and decorative flourishes that no longer simply enhanced the home, they defined it. The exterior received just as much attention. Stonework was rebuilt and refined, new architectural accents were added, and the entire facade was given a presence that made it unmistakable from the street. What had once been a handsome house became something closer to a landmark, a residence that could hold its own among the great homes of America's wealthiest cities. Inside, the structural changes brought a new sense of flow. The rooms unfolded into one another with a kind of theatrical progression, guiding guests through a sequence of spaces that grew progressively more elaborate. The house no longer felt like a collection of rooms, but an orchestrated experience, crafted with intention and designed to impress at every turn. The renovation blurred the boundaries between living space and artistry, turning the mansion into a three-dimensional narrative of the Doheny family's ascent. Word of the spectacular expansion did not stay contained within Chester Place. Newspapers and popular magazines caught wind of the grand project, publishing photographs and enthusiastic descriptions that painted the mansion as one of Los Angeles's crown jewels. Readers were captivated, and curiosity spread quickly. Suddenly, the quiet gates of Chester Place saw strangers lingering outside, hoping for a glimpse of the transformed residence they had read about. The home became more than a symbol of achievement. It became a subject of fascination, a destination for sightseers who wanted to witness the grandeur themselves. And with that fascination came an unexpected challenge. The privacy that had drawn the Dohenys to the neighborhood was beginning to slip away, replaced by the steady presence of onlookers who crowded near the entrance at every hour. The very success of the renovation had turned the mansion into a small urban legend, and the family was now faced with a problem they had never anticipated. As soon as the mansion's transformation appeared in magazines, the quiet rhythm of Chester Place shifted into something the neighborhood had never experienced before. The photographs, lavish, carefully staged, filled with gleaming surfaces and ornate ceilings, circulated through Los Angeles faster than news of any political event or social happening. Readers pored over every detail, fascinated by the scale and splendor of the home that had risen from behind the private gates. And once curiosity took root, the public began to move. People who had never ventured into this part of the city now made their way toward Chester Place just to stand outside its entrance and imagine what grandeur lay beyond the walls. Carriages pulled up at all hours, later replaced by the steady hum of early automobiles, each one pausing long enough for passengers to lean out and catch a glimpse of the mansion that had become the talk of the town. The street outside the estate transformed into an informal promenade. Families taking weekend strolls lingered quietly, pointing toward the towering facade. Travelers visiting Los Angeles added the mansion to their list of must-see sights, treating it with the same reverence they gave to theaters and monuments. Even the city's elite, who normally prided themselves on discretion, found themselves drawn to the spectacle, arriving under the cover of polite curiosity, but staying long enough to join the growing crowd. For many, the house was no longer just a residence. It was proof of what the booming city was becoming, a symbol of what success looked like in a place that seemed to reinvent itself every decade. But with admiration came intrusion. The Dohenys had expected attention, but they could not have predicted the constant presence of strangers gathering just beyond their gates. From the vantage point of the mansion's upper windows, the scene was almost surreal. Clusters of onlookers lined up along the sidewalk, some whispering as if they were near a museum exhibit, others simply staring with parted lips at what they believed to be the pinnacle of American prosperity. Servants reported that people came at dawn, peering between the wrought iron bars to catch the soft glow of sunrise on the stone exterior. Others arrived late at night, hoping that a single lit window might reveal a silhouette or hint at the family's private life. The mansion had become a kind of living curiosity, a place both admired and intruded upon. For the Dohenys, who valued their privacy as much as their new home, the situation became increasingly difficult to ignore. The peace that had originally drawn them to Chester Place was dissolving under the weight of constant attention. Even the gardens, once silent and serene, felt exposed. The family realized that if they wanted to regain control over their sanctuary, they needed to take decisive, strategic action, something that would protect not just the mansion, but the entire atmosphere of the neighborhood. And so, Edward Doheny made a bold decision. Instead of retreating or adjusting to the new reality, he reshaped it entirely by purchasing every remaining lot in Chester Place, 13 parcels in total. With this move, he effectively extended the boundaries of his estate and created a buffer of privacy no entourage of sightseers could easily penetrate. The empty lots gave the family the breathing room they needed. The additional properties ensured that no new homes, businesses, or wandering neighbors would press too closely against their walls. Chester Place, once merely exclusive, now became something entirely different. A private enclave controlled almost completely by the Dohenys. The change was instant. Where crowds once gathered, silence slowly returned. The edges of the estate became a shield, absorbing the curiosity of the outside world and restoring the calm Edward Doheny had sought from the beginning. And with that calm came opportunity. Now that the family had reclaimed their sense of seclusion, they could finally do what they had always intended: open the doors of the mansion not to the public, but to carefully chosen guests, guiding them into a world of architectural splendor and intimate craftsmanship. The threshold of the home was no longer a boundary under siege. It became the gateway to an interior universe that few would ever see, a universe the Dohenys were ready to reveal one exquisite room at a time. The experience of entering the Doheny mansion began long before guests laid eyes on its grandest rooms. It started the moment they crossed the threshold and stepped into the reception space, a room designed not simply to welcome, but to prepare. Every visitor, whether arriving for an intimate gathering or a lavish evening event, encountered an atmosphere that immediately transformed their expectations. The reception room functioned as a kind of overture, hinting at the symphony of craftsmanship and opulence awaiting deeper inside the house. Soft light filtered through tall windows draped in heavy fabric, casting warm tones across polished floors. The arrangement of furniture, low, upholstered seating in rich textiles, carefully selected tables with carved legs, elegant sideboards holding meticulously chosen decorative pieces, created a balance between comfort and grandeur. Nothing was overwhelming, yet everything felt curated, intentional, and subtly theatrical. The room suggested refinement rather than spectacle, allowing guests a moment to adjust to the sensation of entering a world shaped by extraordinary resources and taste. Walls adorned with ornate paneling and delicate moldings framed the space, drawing the eye upward and giving the room a vertical elegance. These details weren't merely ornamental, they established the mansion's language from the outset. Every groove, curve, and flourish signaled that the house was not just a display of wealth. It was a study in decorative storytelling. The textures of the room whispered of the hands that crafted them, of the artistic vision behind every architectural choice. For guests, it created an immediate sense of anticipation, a feeling that they had stepped into a setting where even the quietest corners held meaning. Against one wall, a grand mirror with an intricately gilded frame reflected the room's soft glow, expanding its sense of space and heightening the impression of abundance. Nearby, a console table supported vases filled with seasonal arrangements, fresh flowers that brought life and fragrance into the formal environment. Small touches like these softened the room's grandeur, grounding it in warmth and hospitality. They hinted that, despite the scale of the house, the family valued thoughtful gestures and knew how to shape an atmosphere that felt welcoming rather than intimidating. The reception room also served a more subtle purpose. It acted as a threshold between the ordinary world outside and the layered magnificence concealed beyond the velvet curtains. Guests instinctively lowered their voices upon entering, sensing that the mansion observed them just as closely as they observed it. The hush that settled over the room was not imposed. It emerged naturally from its design, the way the colors, light, and proportions invited attention and respect. It was a prelude that allowed visitors to absorb their surroundings, preparing their senses for the shift from gracious elegance to full architectural grandeur. And then, once greetings were exchanged and the initial awe began to settle, the experience gently shifted. The doorman, or a household attendant, would draw aside the heavy drapes that concealed the passage into the deeper rooms of the mansion. The fabric slipped away with a soft whisper, revealing the entrance to a world far more elaborate and expressive than the reception room hinted. The careful restraint of the first space gave way to the promise of soaring ceilings, lavish materials, and the kind of artistry that defined the house's reputation. With each guest now attuned to the rhythm of the home, the journey continued forward, away from the calm introduction and into the very heart of its decorative splendor, where the mansion's identity unfolded in full and unforgettable detail. Stepping beyond the reception room, guests entered a space that instantly shifted the atmosphere from refined anticipation to full theatrical splendor, the Pompeian Room. It was here that the mansion abandoned restraint entirely and revealed the scale of its ambitions. Inspired by classical motifs and the rediscovered aesthetics of ancient Mediterranean villas, the room seemed designed not merely for gatherings, but for impression. Marble, in shades that echoed warm earth and cool stone, covered the walls and floors, creating an environment that felt both timeless and imposing. Every surface reflected light differently, producing a subtle interplay of brightness and shadow that gave the room a sense of living movement. The central feature of the space soared overhead, a domed skylight that rose for 2 full stories, allowing natural light to pour into the hall in cascading layers throughout the day. When the sun hit its peak, the dome illuminated the marble below with an almost celestial radiance, and in the evenings when lamps and candlelight replaced daylight, the dome transformed into a shimmering canopy that seemed to float above guests like the vault of a classical theater. This play of light and stone was intentional, an architectural gesture meant to evoke antiquity while celebrating the modern grandeur of the mansion. It reminded visitors that the room was not merely decorated, it was staged. The Pompeian Room was the chosen venue for the most extravagant gatherings the household hosted. Banquets filled the space with activity, each event arranged to reflect the family's sense of occasion. A long table, adorned with overflowing arrangements of fresh flowers, occupied the center during formal dinners, its polished surface catching the glow from the dome above. Silverware and crystal glassware sparkled under the illumination, creating an almost choreographed scene in which each element played a role. Guests would take their places in chairs upholstered in deep, rich fabrics that contrasted beautifully with the cool marble surrounding them. The sound of conversation mingled with the gentle clink of utensils, blending into a harmonious backdrop that enhanced the room's theatrical impact. Every detail in the space had been chosen to reinforce the sense of grandeur. Intricate stonework framed the corners, decorative niches held classical sculptures, brocade textiles lined the upper wall sections, their patterns catching the light with subdued sophistication. Even the floor, designed with mosaic-like precision, added depth and texture to the experience of walking through the hall. The room did not simply impress. It enveloped guests in a visual narrative that connected the past and present, the intimate and the monumental. During celebrations, attendants moved silently through the space, refilling glasses and ensuring that no guest felt the slightest interruption. The flow of the evening depended on the room's acoustics. Subtle echoes amplified laughter while softening conversations, creating an atmosphere that felt both lively and elegant. And when a banquet reached its most memorable moments, the symphony of sounds, laughter, the rustle of formal attire, the chiming of crystal, rose toward the dome and dispersed like notes in a grand auditorium. But as memorable as the banquets were, the room was more than a dining hall. It served as a transition between the mansion's visual pageantry and the emotional resonance found in its musical spaces. When an evening in the Pompeian Room approached its peak, the faint sound of a harp or the rich notes of a piano began drifting down the hallway. The vibrations curled along the marble, drawing guests' attention away from the table and toward the corridor leading deeper into the mansion. The shift felt natural, almost orchestrated, as if the house itself knew when to guide visitors from spectacle to sentiment. And so, as the final glasses were lifted and the glow of the dome softened, the allure of music beckoned. Guests would rise, their footsteps echoing softly upon the marble floor, and follow the gentle melody toward the next chapter of the home's narrative, into the room where sound became the mansion's beating heart. Leaving behind the marble glow of the Pompeian Room, guests followed the drifting notes down a corridor where the air itself seemed to change. The warmth of conversation faded into a quieter, more intimate atmosphere, and soon they reached one of the mansion's most enchanting spaces, a room designed not just for music, but for the experience of feeling it. The first music room unfolded with a kind of quiet majesty. the kind that did not demand attention but drew it naturally like a soft chord played in a silent hall. The moment one stepped inside, the acoustics made themselves known. Every sound, every footstep, every breath, every whispered remark seemed to settle into a perfect balance. The room had been crafted with an almost scientific precision, shaped so that tones could travel without distortion and linger without overwhelming. Even casual visitors could sense it, the way the air carried the vibration of a single string, or how a simple chord from the grand piano felt fuller, more resonant, as if the walls themselves were participating. Those walls were masterpieces in their own right. Continuous ornate plasterwork stretched across them, merging seamlessly with the ceiling, creating the illusion that the entire space had been sculpted from a single, flowing material. Curves, scrolls, floral motifs, and delicate reliefs combined to produce an organic rhythm that complemented the music played within. Nothing in the room appeared flat. Every surface had texture, depth, and intention. As light filtered through the tall windows or flickered from the lamps at dusk, the shadows danced within the patterns, making the room feel alive, breathing, listening, responding. At the heart of the space stood the grand piano, polished to a deep sheen, and positioned so its sound could unfurl across the room with perfect clarity. Musicians who visited the home often remarked that the instrument felt different here, as though the room helped it express the full range of its voice. When the first notes filled the air, the plasterwork seemed to soften, the ceiling seemed to rise, and the room became a vessel for the emotion embedded in every melody. Whether a lively composition for a private gathering or a tender lull of a solo performance before dinner, the music shaped the atmosphere with gentle authority. The furnishings were arranged not to dominate, but to support the experience. Plush seating formed a semicircle around the piano, giving listeners the best vantage points for both sound and sight. The color palette leaned toward warm, timeless tones, soft golds, deep creams, muted greens, and created a setting that encouraged guests to linger. Here, the mansion did not overwhelm with size or opulence. It enveloped. It invited intimacy. It encouraged listeners to surrender fully to the harmony of architecture and music. As guests settled into the room, their attention would often shift not only to the performance, but to the interplay of details around them. The ceiling's elaborate plaster tendrils acted like visual echoes of the music below, and the ornate moldings, curved, layered, impossibly intricate, seemed to pulse with each crescendo. Even in silence, the room held a quiet musicality, as though the echoes of past performances remained suspended in the air, waiting to be awakened. It was often only after spending some time in this space that visitors noticed something else. A set of curtains positioned at the far end of the room, heavy, rich fabric, perfectly matching the room's palette, draped in a way that suggested both elegance and secrecy. They weren't merely decorative, they concealed something. The placement was intentional, almost teasing, inviting only the most attentive guests to wonder what lay behind them. And as the final notes from the piano softened into the stillness, the curtain's subtle sway, or the faint outline of the space behind them, became impossible to ignore. It was clear that the musical experience was only one part of the journey. Something more awaited just beyond that fabric, something quieter, rarer, and steeped in the personal world of the Dohenys. And so, drawn by curiosity and the gentle invitation of the room itself, guests found their attention shifting toward the concealed doorway, ready to discover what secrets the mansion kept just out of sight. Beyond the curtains, the light dimmed just enough to signal a shift, not toward grandeur or spectacle, but toward something quieter and more inward. The transition from the music room to the next space felt almost ceremonial, as if the mansion itself were asking guests to lower their voices and prepare for a different kind of experience. The room revealed behind the heavy drapery was the library, a space that carried an entirely different energy from the vibrant halls they had passed through. Here, the house's pulse slowed. The walls, lined from floor to ceiling with shelves, absorbed sound instead of amplifying it, creating an atmosphere that encouraged reflection rather than display. The library was not massive, nor was it intended to impress in the same way the reception areas or banquet halls did. Its charm came from its intimacy, from the way its warm wood paneling and softened lighting made it feel like a refuge. Deep armchairs were placed strategically around small tables, offering places for reading, writing, or quiet conversation. The scent of aged leather and polished wood lingered in the air, giving the space a sense of continuity. A reminder that, while the mansion had been shaped by grand gestures, it also cherished the quieter moments that filled its rooms. Books of every subject filled the shelves: travel journals, philosophical treatises, historical accounts, classic literature, scientific curiosities. Each volume seemed to carry its own story, and together they created a tapestry of human thought that felt as rich as any of the house's luxurious materials. The collection was not merely decorative, it reflected the intellectual curiosity of the family, offering insight into their interests, habits, and the hours they spent away from the public eye. Yet for all the comfort and charm of the library, it held a secret known only to a select few. In one corner, partially concealed behind a drapery panel that matched the room's palette, there was a second set of curtains, less grand than the ones in the music room, but far more intriguing. Those who noticed the subtle folds and the faint outline of a hidden doorway often sensed immediately that the room held more than it appeared to. And those lucky enough to be invited beyond this veil discovered the mansion's most treasured sanctuary. The rare books room was not large, but its impact was undeniable. Stepping inside felt like crossing into another world, a world where every surface whispered of history and craftsmanship, where the air carried the faint, unmistakable scent of old paper and ink. Shelves crafted with exceptional care held volumes that were not just valuable, but irreplaceable. First editions, centuries-old manuscripts, beautifully bound works of literature, scientific discoveries recorded in their original printings. Each book represented a moment in time, preserved and protected within this private archive. The room's design reflected its purpose. Lighting was soft and directed, illuminating the spines without producing harsh glare. The shelves were arranged to encourage slow, deliberate browsing rather than hurried movement. A single table sat in the center, inviting readers to sit, turn the pages with care, and feel the weight of knowledge that had traveled across generations to arrive here. In this room, even silence seemed thoughtful, as if the walls were listening to every breath, every page turned, every quiet realization sparked by the words on the paper. To step back from the rare books room into the library was to feel the shift from sacred quiet to warm domesticity. And leaving the library entirely felt like emerging from a private universe, one accessible only to those the family trusted enough to share their most cherished intellectual possessions. For visitors, this was often the moment when they realized that the mansion was not merely a display of wealth, but a collection of personal worlds, each room offering a different glimpse into the soul of the home. And the mansion had more of these worlds, hidden corners of calm, reflection, and personal meaning. Leaving the sanctuary of books behind, guests were gently guided toward the next such space, one shaped not by literature, but by devotion, where a different kind of stillness awaited in the private realm of the family's spiritual life. Leaving the library and its hidden archive behind, guests found themselves entering a different register of the mansion's character, spaces shaped not for display or entertainment, but for contemplation. These were the corners of the home where silence carried purpose, and where the design served not to impress a crowd, but to nourish the inner world of those who lived there. The first such haven belonged to Mrs. Doheny, whose private study revealed an entirely different facet of the estate's personality. Her study was refined yet understated, a room where elegance took the form of calm rather than grandeur. Soft wood tones, carefully selected fabrics, and gentle lighting created an atmosphere that encouraged thought. Here, the ornate excess of the public rooms gave way to a more restrained beauty. Polished surfaces without overwhelming shine, delicate patterns instead of bold flourishes, and a clarity of layout that invited focus. The desk, crafted with meticulous attention to detail, held neatly arranged papers, correspondence, and small personal items that offered glimpses into her daily life. A window framed the gardens outside, allowing natural light to warm the room and giving her a peaceful view during the quiet hours she spent here. Books, though fewer than in the grand library, lined one wall, reflecting her own literary interests. A comfortable chair beside a small table hinted at afternoons spent reading or reflecting. Decorative objects, carefully chosen pieces of porcelain, framed photographs, a vase that changed with the seasons, added touches of sentiment that grounded the space in intimacy. The room did not need to be large, its purpose was different. It was a place where she could think, write, and retreat from the vibrant hum of the larger household, a place where the house's grandeur softened into something deeply personal. Just beyond this study lay another unique interior, the Indian room, perhaps one of the most unexpected and culturally expressive spaces in the residence. While many areas of the mansion drew upon classical European influences, this room reached outward, taking inspiration from indigenous artistic traditions. A dramatic frieze encircled the upper walls, depicting stylized scenes rich in color and symbolism. The mural's motifs, carefully researched and respectfully represented, brought a sense of narrative to the space, turning the walls themselves into storytellers. The room's furnishings complemented the mural without overwhelming it. Woven textiles, earthy tones, and handcrafted pieces created a cohesive environment where art and atmosphere merged seamlessly. The space felt grounded, rooted in history, yet alive with visual energy. It was a room that encouraged not only contemplation, but connection, a place where guests might sit and absorb the depth and meaning embedded in every painted figure. Unlike the opulent public rooms, the Indian room possessed a rare, quiet intensity, a moment of cultural appreciation framed within the walls of a private home. These intimate interiors revealed something essential about the Doheny household, their belief that a home should offer dedicated spaces for every facet of a person's life. Intellectual curiosity, creative focus, cultural appreciation, all found their place within the mansion's carefully crafted rooms. Each space reflected a particular interest or need, shaped not by grand gestures, but by personal intention. The mansion, for all its size and magnificence, understood the value of privacy, reflection, and emotional retreat. And yet, as guests moved through these quieter corners, another presence made itself felt, a kind of hush that went beyond the calm of a study or a themed interior. It was a stillness with a different texture, suggesting that the house held a space where contemplation deepened into something more profound. Leaving behind the personal sanctuaries, visitors found themselves being guided toward a room not just of thought, but of spirit, the place where the mansion's atmosphere shifted from introspection to reverence, and where the family's private devotion shaped the next chapter of the home's narrative. Moving deeper into the mansion, guests soon reached a space that felt unlike anything they had encountered in the grand public halls or the quiet private studies. The atmosphere shifted the moment one approached it. Voices softened instinctively, footsteps slowed, and even the air seemed to settle into a hushed stillness. This was the family chapel, a room that existed not for display or conversation, but for reflection, reverence, and quiet inner balance. It was the spiritual heart of the home, tucked within the mansion's lavish architecture, yet carrying a presence far greater than its physical size. The chapel was created during one of the major renovation phases, built at the request of the family to provide a sanctuary within the estate where they could gather for moments of peace and devotion. While the rest of the house celebrated artistry, culture, and social life, this room provided a place where those outward expressions gave way to something deeper. It was a retreat from the demands of wealth and attention, a shelter where the world outside, its noise, its curiosity, its expectations, could not intrude. Architecturally, the chapel blended traditional ecclesiastical motifs with the mansion's overall aesthetic. Tall, arched windows allowed soft, filtered light to wash gently across the space, creating a serene glow that shifted over the course of the day. The walls were adorned with subtle decorative elements, delicate gilding, finely painted accents, and carved details that echoed European chapels without directly imitating them. The ceiling rose gracefully overhead, giving the room a sense of height and airiness, as if encouraging one to lift their thoughts upward. At the center stood a beautifully crafted altar, simple in form, yet rich in meaning. It was positioned so that the light naturally highlighted it, emphasizing its quiet importance. Rows of wooden pews offered space for family gatherings, morning prayers, private reflections, or moments of solitude during difficult times. The floor, polished to a warm sheen, reflected the glow of the lanterns and candles used during evening services, adding a gentle shimmer to the otherwise still room. Despite the mansion's scale and complexity, the chapel felt intimate, almost as if it existed outside of time. Guests entering it often reported a feeling of separation from the rest of the home, as though the room itself created a boundary between the spiritual and the material. It was a place where conversations faded into silence, where footsteps softened, where even the sounds of the household staff seemed to dissolve before reaching its threshold. In this quiet, the family found a grounding presence, a reminder of values and traditions that shaped their everyday lives. For the Dohenys, the chapel was more than just a symbolic space. It was woven into the rhythm of their routines, a place to start the morning with reflection, to gather in moments of uncertainty, or to enjoy peaceful intervals during the bustle of life within such a large estate. Visitors could sense that the chapel was cherished, maintained with particular care, and treated with a reverence that set it apart from every other room in the mansion. And then, as guests lingered in this atmosphere of calm devotion, the mansion gently guided them onward. Beyond the quiet of the chapel, faint sounds began to return. A soft vibration in the air, a distant melody threading through the halls. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably musical. The serene stillness of the chapel slowly gave way to the allure of yet another space shaped by artistry and emotion. Following the gentle pull of those notes, visitors found themselves leaving the tranquility of the spiritual sanctuary and moving once again toward the vibrant world of sound, toward the second music room, where the mansion's voice grew fuller, richer, and ready to lead them into the next chapter of its story. Leaving the silent glow of the chapel behind, guests followed the faint notes drifting through the corridor until the melody grew clearer, warmer, and more inviting. The sound led them into another musical haven, similar in purpose to the first, yet crafted with an entirely different spirit. The second music room did not echo the intimacy of its counterpart. Instead, it embraced a more open, expressive character, a space designed not only for listening, but for sharing, performing, and experiencing music as a communal event. If the first music room was a whisper, the second was a confident voice. The need for two such rooms became immediately apparent to anyone who stepped inside this larger space. While the first was sculpted for introspection and acoustic purity, this second hall catered to gatherings, soirees, and evenings when the family and their guests wished to immerse themselves in music more dynamically. The ceilings rose higher, allowing sound to travel in sweeping waves that filled the room with clarity and volume. The walls, adorned with ornate panels and plaster figuration, created a setting where melodies could grow bold without losing their elegance. A second grand piano stood proudly at the center, its polished surface gleaming beneath chandeliers that cast soft, cascading light. Unlike the piano in the first music room, which felt almost like a companion to quiet thought, this instrument was meant for performance. It commanded the space with a presence that encouraged musicians, whether family members or visiting artists, to play with confidence and emotion. Even those with modest talent felt inspired to participate, knowing the room would catch their notes and lift them beautifully through the air. The room's furnishings were arranged to support gatherings of varying size. Rows of finely carved chairs could be introduced for more formal evenings, while plush seating along the perimeter allowed for smaller, more intimate family performances. Decorative rugs softened the acoustics just enough to balance the room's energy, ensuring the sound remained rich without becoming overwhelming. Large draped windows framed the space, allowing natural light to flow in during daytime events and revealing the softly lit garden paths during evening recitals. Family evenings in this room became part of the estate's rhythm. On some nights, a few close friends gathered to enjoy a performance, sharing laughter and stories between pieces. On others, musicians filled the hall with compositions that seemed almost too grand for a private home, their final notes lingering long after the applause faded. Celebrations and receptions often passed through this room as well, with music providing the emotional centerpiece of the evening. In a mansion full of lavish rooms, this one held a freshness, a sense of life unfolding in real time. But the room was more than just a performance space. It was a place where the family expressed themselves, connecting through sound after days filled with responsibilities, guests, or the relentless attention from the outside world. The second music room allowed for experiences that were both deeply personal and undeniably social. It bridged the gap between the intimate corners of the home and the grander outward-facing world of its public spaces. And it was this bridge that guided the flow of the tour, After guests absorbed the energy of the second music room, the resonance, the warmth, the lingering harmonies, they naturally found themselves carried back toward the mansion's larger social heart. The corridors leading out of the music hall opened once again into spaces designed for gatherings, conversation, and the daily rituals of high society. From here, the journey returned to the public rooms of the house, the areas where elegance became part of everyday living and where the mansion resumed its role as a stage for social life. The next chapter awaited in the world of polished wood, formal arrangements, and ceremonial meals, a world best experienced in the dining spaces that define the rhythm of the household. From the lively energy of the second music room, guests naturally drifted toward one of the most ceremonially important areas of the estate, the dining spaces where the house shifted its voice from melody to ritual. Here, the mansion revealed how it expressed luxury not only through grand architecture or artistic interiors, but through the very rhythm of daily life. The dining room and the adjoining banquet hall formed a world of polished wood, gleaming silver, and orchestrated service, where each meal, whether intimate or extravagant, became a performance in its own right. The formal dining room anchored this part of the home. Tall ceilings framed by ornate plaster borders gave the space a sense of height and dignity, while richly paneled walls created warmth that balanced its grandeur. A long table, carved with remarkable craftsmanship, stood at the center like a stage, capable of hosting anything from small family dinners to evenings of distinguished guests. The chairs, upholstered in luxurious fabrics, immediately signaled the room's importance. Chandeliers hung above, their light reflecting off delicate glassware and polished surfaces, creating a soft glow that made every gathering feel momentous. While the public rooms of the mansion often dazzled with elaborate decoration, the dining room conveyed a more subtle sophistication. Its grandeur emerged not from constant embellishment, but from the harmony of proportion, material, and atmosphere. Portraits and curated artworks adorned the walls, each carefully chosen to complement the room's stately character. The ambiance shifted depending on the occasion, quiet and intimate for family meals, lively and ceremonious for official dinners, and utterly theatrical during full banquets. Connected to the dining room, the banquet hall elevated mealtimes to a form of celebration. This larger space was reserved for moments when the house acted as host to city officials, notable guests, or extended gatherings. Here, long tables overflowed with floral arrangements, and rows of crystal glasses lined up like soldiers ready to catch the flicker of candlelight. The acoustics softened laughter and conversation, creating an atmosphere that felt at once lavish and inviting. The banquet hall embraced spectacle. It was designed to impress, to remind every visitor that the house stood among the great residences of its era. Yet the magic of these rooms depended not only on their design, but on the bustling, unseen world that supported them. Behind the scenes, the kitchen formed the heart of an intricate operation. It was more than a place for meal preparation. It was a testament to modernity. Constantly updated with the latest appliances and equipment, the kitchen evolved with every technological leap, ensuring that the staff worked with tools considered cutting edge at the time. Gas ranges, sterilizing devices, specialized refrigeration units, all of it reflected the household's commitment to efficiency and excellence. The staff, trained to operate this evolving array of equipment, moved through their routines with precision. They prepared menus that varied from elaborate multi-course banquets to simple daily meals, each crafted with the same attention to detail. During events, their work synchronized perfectly with the timing of the dining room, ensuring that dishes arrived at the exact moment the atmosphere was ready for them. Their presence was almost invisible by design. The service felt effortless because it was orchestrated with discipline and pride. Despite the grandeur of the dining spaces, they also served as places where the family created their own traditions. Birthdays, quiet suppers, holiday meals, these smaller moments filled the room with a more intimate warmth, softening its formality. Even the most opulent hallways and decorations could not overshadow the human stories that unfolded at the table. Here, conversations drifted from daily happenings to future plans, from reflections on the past to playful exchanges that only close families share. And just as the mansion's architecture carried guests from spectacle to serenity, the flow of the tour now followed the same pattern. After witnessing the height of formality in the dining halls and the disciplined artistry of the kitchen, visitors were guided into a realm that felt softer, gentler, and closer to the heart of the home. It was time to step away from grandeur and enter the cozy corners where the family enjoyed quieter mornings, rooms designed not for display but for comfort. Beyond the shine of the banquet halls and the calculated elegance of formal dinners lay a side of the mansion that most guests never witnessed, a softer, quieter realm where the house shed its ceremonial grandeur and became a home in the truest sense. These were the morning rooms and family spaces, where the rituals of daily life unfolded with an ease and warmth that contrasted beautifully with the mansion's more theatrical interiors. Stepping into these rooms felt like exhaling after a long evening, trading chandeliers and polished formality for sunlight, gentle fabrics, and the faint clatter of breakfastware. The morning room played a central role in this transition. Positioned to catch the early light, its windows framed the gardens in soft tones of gold and green, inviting the day into the house long before the rest of the rooms stirred. The decor was intentionally lighter than in the public halls: pastel tones, graceful furniture, delicate draperies that moved gently with the morning breeze. This was where the family gathered not as hosts, not as figures of societal prominence, but simply as themselves. The room's intimacy encouraged conversations still touched by sleepiness, the sharing of plans for the day, and the simple comfort of starting each morning together. Unlike the grand dining room, which spoke the language of ceremony, the morning room spoke the language of routine and connection. Breakfasts here were often accompanied by the soft murmur of newspaper pages turning, the tinkling of utensils on porcelain, and the occasional laughter that floated through the air with effortless familiarity. The staff served meals with less formality than in the evenings, simple dishes made elegant by the room's brightness and the peaceful rhythm of the mornings. This was a space where time felt slower, where the pressures of wealth and responsibility seemed held at bay, if only for the span of a meal. Close by, another smaller breakfast nook offered an even more private retreat. With its cozy alcove seating and views of the inner courtyard, it became a favorite spot for solitary mornings or quiet conversations between two family members. The room's charm came not from elaborate ornamentation, but from its sincerity, a corner that asked nothing of its occupants except to be present. Here, the mansion's scale seemed to shrink, revealing the humanity behind the opulent surfaces and the lived-in comfort hidden beneath its grandeur. These morning spaces offered a glimpse into the household's true rhythms. They revealed how the mansion adapted to the moods and needs of its residents, providing not only rooms for entertainment and display, but sanctuaries for reflection, nourishment, and emotional grounding. The home's character was shaped just as much by these modest rituals as by its grandest gatherings. In these sunlit corners, visitors could sense the balance the Dohenys sought, a life of accomplishment paired with moments of quiet domestic warmth. The morning rooms also served as transitional spaces in the broader journey through the mansion. Having experienced the public grandeur and the social rituals of the dining spaces, guests now found themselves moving deeper into the home's most personal territories. The atmosphere shifted once again, not into the calm contemplation of studies or the reverence of the chapel, but into the highly intimate realm where the family rested, dreamed, and found privacy. From these gentle spaces of daily life, the path led toward the mansion's upper floors, where the bedrooms awaited, private worlds shaped with the same care as the public halls, yet designed to reflect the individuality and comfort of each family member. Here, the story of the house became quieter still, inviting visitors into the most intimate chambers of the estate, where the layers of luxury softened into spaces built for rest, identity, and the quiet end of each day. Moving upward through the mansion, guests entered a quieter dimension of its architecture, spaces crafted not for gatherings, not for ritual, but for rest, intimacy, and the expression of personal identity. The bedrooms and adjoining en-suites formed a world apart from the public rooms. Here, the house revealed itself through tenderness rather than grandeur. Each chamber reflected the tastes, habits, and private rhythms of the family, becoming miniature works of art shaped with intention and emotional nuance. The main bedroom suite was perhaps the most striking. Tall windows framed the gardens, allowing morning light to spill across floors made of carefully selected woods, their grains polished to a gentle sheen. The walls were adorned with plasterwork that flowed in soft patterns, never competing with the room's purpose, only enhancing its quiet harmony. Heavy draperies added a sense of warmth, while a carved bed, draped in luxurious fabrics, acted as the centerpiece. The ensuite bathroom attached to this chamber seemed almost daring for its era. Marble surfaces, elegant fixtures, and thoughtful details created an atmosphere of refinement that made daily routines feel ceremonial. Other bedrooms carried their own personalities. One room was decorated in lighter tones, creams, pale blues, floral accents, creating a sense of calm, perfect for leisurely afternoons of reading or reflection. Another embraced darker woods, rich colors, and deeper textures, giving it the character of a retreat meant for solitude and concentration. Every bedroom possessed its own palette, its own mood, its own architectural vocabulary. No two looked alike, because no two members of the family lived their lives in the same way. The house respected individuality, expressing it through the materials chosen, the curves of the moldings, the arrangement of the furniture, and the thoughtful placement of artworks or cherished objects. The en-suites were equally distinctive. Some featured intricate tile work inspired by European bathhouses. Others emphasized simplicity with polished stone and delicate metallic accents. The craftsmanship in these rooms went far beyond practicality. Each space felt choreographed, designed to transform the quietest moments of daily life into experiences that balanced comfort and elegance. Even the smallest details, from doorknobs to cabinet pulls, were chosen with a sensitivity to texture and design, creating a sense that these rooms were not merely functional, but deeply personal sanctuaries. Walking through these private chambers offered an unexpected insight into the mansion's personality. The public rooms showed its pride, the morning rooms showed its warmth, but the bedrooms revealed its heart. Here, the house felt lived in, softened, shaped by routines that unfolded behind closed doors. These spaces held stories spoken not through grandeur, but through subtlety. Stories of late-night conversations, quiet mornings, laughter shared in moments of privacy. In these rooms, the mansion felt closest to being a home rather than a monument. And yet, as guests absorbed the comfort and serenity of these upper floors, a quiet awareness lingered in the air, an understanding that even the most magnificent houses carry parts of their history in shadow. The mansion, for all its beauty and refinement, was no exception, because every home, no matter how grand, has its shadows. Those shadows became more pronounced in the mansion's final chapter, a period defined by triumph, turbulence, and transformation. After years spent as a symbol of rising fortune and architectural ambition, the house inevitably found itself swept into the complex tides that surrounded the Doheny family. As decades passed, the mansion stood witness to moments of triumph and episodes that cast long, uncertain echoes across its halls. Yet, through it all, the house endured, its walls absorbing not only the voices of celebrations and gatherings, but the weight of whispered worries and the strain of difficult seasons. When the family patriarch's era came to an end, the estate entered a new phase, one shaped less by expansion and more by preservation. The mansion's future, once tied exclusively to private life, began to shift toward a broader identity. Its architecture, so bold, so expressive, so deeply connected to the history of early Los Angeles, gained recognition beyond the city. As years progressed, historians, preservationists, and admirers of design began to understand the house not merely as a private residence, but as a cultural landmark. Its rooms, once occupied by the rhythms of family life, became repositories of a bygone age, each corner echoing the story of the city's rise. The house weathered periods of uncertainty, yet always found its way back into relevance. Changes in ownership, evolving uses, and shifting cultural landscapes never erased its essence. Instead, the mansion adapted, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, until it emerged as a preserved treasure, admired for its architectural integrity and its connection to one of the most influential eras in Southern California's development. Visitors who walked through its halls in later years found themselves traversing more than an opulent home. They were stepping through the layers of a city's history, through the triumphs and trials that shaped an entire region. The mansion's legacy grew stronger as time continued. It came to represent not only wealth, but endurance, a structure that carried within it the aspirations of the early 20th century, the weight of personal stories, and the resilience needed to survive cultural shifts. Its rooms, once alive with music and conversation, became symbols of an era's craftsmanship, creativity, and ambition. And in this way, the mansion transcended its origins, becoming something greater than the sum of its brick and stone. Today, the house stands as a testament to everything it has outlasted. It is a living organism in its own way, breathing through preserved spaces, resonating with the echoes of those who once shaped it, and holding within its walls the imprint of every era it has survived. It embodies splendor and struggle, triumph and transformation. And for those who step inside, it offers a rare experience, the chance to stand in a place where time has not vanished, only settled, layer by layer, into the architecture itself. For in the end, the mansion is not just a home or a remnant of history. It is a survivor, still standing, still speaking, still shimmering with the stories of a world that shaped it and a world it helped shape in return.